B. Collins.
Peter B. Collins, news and comment. It's Tuesday, February 26, 2019. And I've been meaning to mention that last week we passed the 2,500 mark. That's right, 2,500 podcasts since we began back in 2009. I don't know what that gets me, but it's an interesting milestone. Our question of the day leading the podcast is, which liar will you believe? Michael Cohen has pled guilty to lying to Congress, and he is returning to Congress in a series of hearings before they trot him off to jail. He got a 60-day extension to report. And the Trump White House and individual one himself are trying to set the stage by a little carpet bombing in advance. And so Sarah Huckabee Sanders was sent out to tell the media, disgraced felon Michael Cohen is going to prison for lying to Congress and making other false statements. Sadly, he will go before Congress this week, and we can expect more of the same. It's laughable that anyone would take a convicted liar like Cohen at his word, and pathetic to see him given yet another opportunity to spread his lies. And why has he admitted? Why has he been convicted of lying? He did it out of loyalty to Trump. And it shows that that kind of loyalty is more effective in a mob boss setting than in Trump world. And so I think Michael Cohen has little to lose by telling the truth. And because he is under the, he didn't make a separate deal of full cooperation. He did offer to cooperate on certain things, and he hopes that will win him some lenience. And he is also hoping that federal law, which permits the reduction in sentence at the request of a prosecutor within a year of a conviction, may benefit him. And so everybody's fascinated to see what Michael Cohen has to say and what new dirt he might produce. Now, based on a report in the Washington Post today, there are serious limits on what he is allowed to talk about. He will not go into any detail on things that overlap with Robert Mueller's special counsel investigation. And that may be the excuse that he uses. Well, Congresswoman, I'd love to answer your question, but Bob Mueller will bite me if I do. So there's going to be a dance here. And he will duck some questions, and we hope that he will add to our knowledge of others. I am most fascinated about the arrangement with the National Enquirer, AMI, American Media Incorporated. And this just was revealed to me the other day. The California Public Employees Retirement Fund, PERS, owns 1/3 of AMI. I had no idea that California's retired public workers were invested in the supermarket tabloid that runs the the Catch and Hide program, Catch and Kill, which is what they did with the Playboy Playmate and the payment that was laundered through the National Enquirer. And the AMI group is in hot water. David Pecker had a plea deal. It was a cooperation agreement, a non-prosecution agreement, and that has clearly been breached. So that's one area where I believe Cohen could be able to offer more information without tripping up the restrictions that are on him. So I have limited expectations of all this, but Michael Cohen has already delivered what I need, which is the plea deal where he pled guilty to structuring these hush money payments at the direction of individual one. And in a moment, we will air out the latest commentary about impeachment and whether it is advisable or not in the current circumstances. Now, Michael Cohen also may be bound by attorney-client privilege. That there are certain things related to his work for Trump that are still covered by that. And that's not supposed to apply when criminal activity is involved. But it remains to be seen exactly how much Cohen will talk. And, of course, some of the interrogation will occur privately behind closed doors, and then we'll have to wait for all that stuff to leak. So today, a federal appeals court upheld the appointment of Robert Mueller as the special counsel. It was challenged by a former aide to Roger Stone, a man named Andrew Miller, who's been resisting a subpoena from the Mueller grand jury since last summer. And this is a challenge that Manafort also made earlier, trying to determine whether Bob Mueller should have been confirmed by the U.S. Senate based on his status in the Justice Department. And in simple terms, the judge said, nope, it's legit. Now to the impeachment discussion presented at the Washington Post by columnist Jennifer Rubin. And she cites Lawrence Tribe, a legal scholar from Harvard, and his co-author Joshua Matz. I'm not familiar with Matz. They've published a book called To End a Presidency, The Power of Impeachment. As you know, if you're a regular listener, I believe that impeachment is dictated by the current circumstances. We have clear criminal behavior by a sitting president. And yet, people hem and haw and say, gosh, should we or shouldn't we? Will it work out the way we want? So Rubin cites Matz and Tribe with this quote. Over time, a focus on impeachment can flatten and distort our politics. Many of Trump's worst policies can't properly be squeezed into an impeachment framework. The same might be said about many of Trump's scariest foreign policy judgments and public statements. The Muslim ban, family separation, North Korea, climate change, these are abhorrent policies, but they're not impeachable offenses. That doesn't matter. We have an impeachable offense with which to try him and hopefully remove him from office before the 2020 elections. And then Rubin takes over with her own comments. If impeachment were to unfold with the Senate almost certainly unable to reach a two-thirds majority for removal, what would all of this have accomplished? Well, the outcome cannot be guaranteed in advance, and only by working through the impeachment process, as I saw vividly and from a front row seat during the Nixon impeachment process. You have to take the risk. And it snowballs, momentum builds, crimes are exposed, and that's what divides the political party that supports its president. And that's the only way you get to the two-thirds required to remove a president in the U.S. Senate. So back to Rubin. Perhaps equally alarming would be the reaction of a good 30% of the voters if Trump were removed. Well, I'm sorry. I will not live in fear of the mobs who don't understand our Constitution, don't care about it, who go to Trump's mob rallies and cheer his violations of our constitutional rights, the way he attacks the media, his recent claim of excessive presidential power with this phony emergency declaration. Back to Jennifer Rubin. She asks, would we really prefer the excruciating process when the presidential campaign, which would be fully underway, would allow voters to deliver their own verdict in 2020? Well, come on. The same tactics, the sowing of discord not by Russians but by our own media, and the way Trump operated during the 2018 midterms, lying repeatedly on a daily basis? We've got to put it to an end before the 2020 campaign, because I don't believe we can risk allowing Trump to run again. He could win. All right, back to Rubin. A clear majority of voters in the midterms last fall said they were opposed to impeachment. Now, it wasn't really an issue before the voters. There were some Republicans who were told to vote for Republicans to prevent Nancy Pelosi from becoming Speaker and leading an impeachment effort. But the Democrats didn't run on impeachment. That election was hardly a referendum on the president's impeachability. I think that is a phony argument. And one more from Jennifer Rubin. Instead of a fodder for articles of impeachment, the particulars of Trump's egregious conduct should form the unassailable argument for Republicans to dump him as their nominee. I'm sorry, Jennifer. This is a party where Trump has used his leverage to control many members of the Senate, some of whom he got elected or reelected just last November. And the idea that we can rely on the goodwill of Republicans to do what's best for our country? I mean, even the vote over the emergency decree is only producing a peel-off of 4 to 6 Republicans so far. And so I have no faith in that. And Jennifer Rubin, go to your room and sit in the corner, facing the corner, okay? Now, here is the biggest hoot that I found in my daily search for news today. It comes from the Washington Post. It's at the top of their homepage as I speak to you right now. It is bannered with exclusive. And here's the headline. U.S. Cyber Command operation disrupted internet access of Russian troll factory on the day of the 2018 midterms. Well, my bullshit detector went off just when I read the headline. And let me continue. The U.S. military blocked internet access to an infamous Russian entity seeking to sow discord among Americans during the 2018 midterms, several U.S. officials said. The strike on the Internet Research Agency in St. Petersburg, Russia, was part of the first offensive cyber campaign against Russia designed to thwart attempts to interfere with a U.S. election. Now, this is credible in no shape or way or form. First of all, to imagine that just by conducting a denial of service effort and shutting down the IRA for a day or two around the election would prevent the sowing of discord, this disinformation, the hate messages that divide Americans and cause them to vote Republican? This is so insulting. And of course, there are no sources for any of this. It's all from anonymous, classified operators. And the idea, when many Americans vote well before the election, they vote by mail. The idea that just shutting them down for 48 hours around Election Day would have an impact on a long-term information campaign? I'm sorry. It simply doesn't make any sense. And then they tell us. Here's the anonymous source. They basically took the IRA offline. They shut them down. Next paragraph. The operation marked the first muscle flexing by U.S. Cyber Command. Really? Really? The first time? Now, it has been assessed, alleged, and reported since 2015 that Russian hacking was going on, and the idea that we have only now, in November of 2018, made an attack on Russia using cyber warfare tactics? I'm sorry. That is totally unbelievable. I mean, this is like a cartoon article. This is less credible than the dreck you find in the National Enquirer. Back to the article. Here's a quote. Part of our objective is to throw a little curveball, inject a little friction, sow confusion, said one defense official. The action has been hailed as a success by Pentagon officials. The disruption to the IRA's networks took place as Americans went to the polls in a day or so afterward, as the votes were tallied, to prevent the Russians from mounting a disinformation campaign that cast doubt on the results. Hey, we can't trust the results because of election fraud in North Carolina and voter suppression all across the country. And when that gets reported, it is described as, an outlier case like the 9th District of North Carolina. And to blame the Russians for the way our elections run and the fact that we don't have confidence in them. All right, there's more in this article. Another element of the Cyber Command campaign first reported by the New York Times involved direct messaging that targeted the trolls and as well as hackers who work for the Russian military, the GRU. Using emails, pop-ups, text, or direct messages, U.S. operatives began last October to let the Russians know that their real names and online handles were known, and they should not interfere in other nations' affairs. Ooh, isn't that scary? We know your name. Vladimir? Oleg? So what? It's not like we're coming to get him. Some IRA officials were so perturbed by the messaging, they launched an internal investigation to root out what they thought were insiders leaking personnel information. I mean, this is beneath yellow journalism. This is contemptible leakage from anonymous sources. And I just find it disgusting. Well, Trump has arrived in Vietnam, and of course they are a day ahead of us, crossed the international date line, and he, I guess, is having dinner with Kim Jong-un, and tomorrow they sit down for their talks. The bar has been lowered, expectations even lower for this huddle, this summit, and we have to recall that our intelligence agencies missed some of what appear to be striking and major developments in North Korea's missile and nuclear capabilities over the last few years. And so we're in a catch-up mode. And I believe that Kim has played Trump so far. What I'd like to see come out of this is a peace treaty negotiation process where we offer to wrap up the 1950s Korean War. It was never ended with an armistice or an actual treaty. And we use that process to move the steps forward to encourage North Korea to dump its nuclear weapons. Now, I don't believe they will ever completely disarm, and particularly at the nuclear level. But Trump does. And so we will see how this meeting turns out. The prognostication is that a treaty process is likely to begin here, and that's something I fully support. There will be liaison offices opened in Washington and Pyongyang, and perhaps some unilateral move by North Korea as an effort to build confidence. But I think that will be about it. Every day I pause for a minute to thank the people who support my work here at the Peter B. Collins Podcast with your subscriptions. And there are a lot of great folks all over the world who listen and who support me through PayPal or however you choose to do it. And I want to name names. I got to pull out my list here. These are people who've recently contributed via PayPal, like Siri Walgren in Northern California, Abby McMillan on the coast of Maine. John Riggy stopped by to get a 24-hour pass. I think he listened to the interview with James Bamford. And we also want to thank Marvin Rasmussen, who is a monthly subscriber. You can join them. All you have to do is visit peterbcollins.com. You click on menu, then click on Become a Subscriber. It lands you on the sign-up page. And from there, you can choose $5, $10, $20 a month. We've got the special bonus book available right now. That is Dr. Justin Frank's Trump on the Couch. It's a fascinating read, and I'd love to send you a copy with your new annual subscription and a mailing address in the continental United States. Today, for something completely different, I've got an in-depth interview I think you will love. I think there's a vague reference to Michael Cohen and Paul Manafort, but other than that, we don't talk about current politics. We talk about turtles. And my friend, the prolific author Peter Laufer, has written more than 20 books. His last one is about the dangerous world of butterflies, and the new one is called Dreaming in Turtle. And he traveled all over the world, to Costa Rica, to Gabon, to many exotic places in the U.S., to look at turtles and the turtle culture and subcultures. And part of it is he discovered the black market in turtles. And here's an excerpt where he tells the story of Kai Zhu, who spent 5 years in U.S. prison after he was caught smuggling turtles at very attractive prices into China.
Kai Zhu is one of those who perhaps is on the leading edge of change, because once he was convicted of federal crimes connected with smuggling turtles, endangered species, out of the U.S. into Canada for transshipment to Asia, he received a sentence of about 5 years in federal prison. And this was quite a surprise, a shock certainly to him and to his lawyer, but quite a surprise for those who have wondered why it has been historically that crimes against animals were not looked at seriously when it came to the sentencing of those convicted. Kaizu apparently was, and this points to other societal ills we have, engaged in this smuggling in order to finance his university education.
I invite you to grab the full interview and listen to it at your convenience. It's available later today for my subscribers at peterbcollins.com, at iTunes, TuneIn, Spreaker, and Stitcher. Well, the tensions along the India-Pakistan Kashmir area have been building. And earlier today, for the first time since 1971, there was an actual air raid staged by India. They flew 40 miles into Pakistani territory and bombed outside a town called Balakot. Now, Pakistan said the strike hit an unpopulated wooded area. India said the location was the site of a training camp used by a militant group called Jaish-e-Mohammed. And that group claimed responsibility for an attack that killed 40 Indians on February 14th. They were paramilitary police assigned to Kashmir. And this escalation is dangerous. The Indian Prime Minister Modi is up for re-election and appears to be working on his hawkish image. And Imran Khan, the Prime Minister of Pakistan, called him an emergency meeting. India has committed uncalled for aggression to which Pakistan shall respond at the time and place of its choosing. That is a dangerous situation. In England, Theresa May has agreed that Parliament should now have the option to seek a delay in Brexit. And this is a concession. She is desperate, trying to find an exit to Brexit. And the things are tightening up with the March 29th deadline. Her opponents politically, they say that she is running out the clock and trying to basically just cram down the currently negotiated deal with the Parliament. And also, any substantial delay past about July would require a approval by all of the other 27 European Union governments. So this is a very messy and unpredictable situation, and Theresa May is backed up against the wall. In Venezuela, the American journalist Jorge Ramos and a Univision news crew essentially went to interview Nicolas Maduro, the president of Venezuela. And Jorge Ramos has a history of calling him a murderer and a dictator, and he embarrassed us by insulting Maduro, and Maduro then responded by having the video equipment seized. The journalists were briefly detained. They have been released. And nobody wins in a situation like this. But you know that Jorge Ramos is going to play his role as a victim and make it seem like the strongman dictator couldn't handle tough questions and insults from him, and therefore we need to invade Venezuela. And this is a very dark day, in my opinion, as the opponents of U.S.-backed regime change in this country are generally silent, if they oppose it. And this leaves us with a situation. I have yet to hear a clear statement from, for example, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. In a moment, I'll share with you the disappointing comments that came from Senator Bernie Sanders in a CNN town hall last night. But this situation, I believe, is going to lead to a takedown of the Maduro government, to an opening to U.S. oil companies of the oil fields of Venezuela. And this kind of U.S. imperialism could lead to a very dangerous occupation that could go on, of course, like Iraq, for years and years and years, longer than we expect. Max Blumenthal and other reporters for the Gray Zone Project are on the ground in Caracas, and Max files his latest video report where he went to the public markets. And according to all the corporate media outlets, there is nothing for people to buy. The shelves are empty, the markets are broken, and people are starving. Let's get a dose.
We are in Macarao in the outskirts of Caracas at a food market where food is being sold below market value, subsidized by the city of Caracas, overseen by the mayor of Caracas. And you can see behind me is toothpaste, which CNN has said does not exist in Venezuela.
And what is on the plane are basic goods, things that aren't available or accessible in Venezuela, things like nutritional biscuits, toothpaste, toothbrushes, just basic commodities that aren't available or readily available to Venezuelans right now because of the regime that they're currently living under.
So, I mean, here you have all the basic foodstuffs, pasta, flour. They're focusing on protein here, so you have a fish stand, and it's being sold well below market rate, as you can see from the prices. This is salted fish. ¿Puedo probarlo? Sí. Tengo hambre, entonces. It's pretty good. It's really good. And here we have ground up chicken made in Venezuela, which is being sold for about $1.25 or 3,800 bolivares. And then over there...
So he is responding, to a question I raised. Last week, he filed a video report from a supermarket in one of the wealthy neighborhoods of Caracas. The shelves were fully stocked, but the affordability issue was one question I had. And here, clearly, these food supplies are available. Now, this is anecdotal. And I understand that there is a severe problem in Venezuela. It is caused in part by the U.S. sanctions, and we just announced new sanctions against Venezuela today. So we want to starve the nation into submission, foment insurrection in order to overthrow Maduro and open up disaster capitalism in Venezuela. Today at consortiumnews.com, John Kiriakou has a great piece. I recommend you read it. I've linked to it in the show file for this podcast. He takes down Greg Craig, the Washington super lawyer. And, you know, I once had a positive impression of Greg Craig because he had worked for Governor Siegelman, the embattled former governor who was railroaded into prison from Alabama with a lot of help from Karl Rove and friends. And Greg Craig was also assigned by Barack Obama to close Guantanamo. That didn't work out, but at that moment, I thought, okay, he must be a good guy. But Kiriakou really pulls back the curtain and shows that while Greg Craig violated the Foreign Agent Registration Act and may be prosecuted for it, he has been a guy who felt he was above the law for a long time. And he recounts his history on the Clinton impeachment trial team, his work at corporate law firms, and he tells a story. Back in 2011, Kiriakou was working for John Kerry on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. He wrote a report about poverty in Haiti, and he sent the report to John Kerry, who killed it on the spot. Why, I asked, says Kiriakou. The answer was clear. Because Greg Craig represents those families who are the wealthy ones in Haiti, and he's my best friend, says John Kerry. The report was never published. And then came the Ukraine case where Greg Craig, working for Paul Manafort, tried to sanitize the history there in order to prop up Yanukovych. And the law firm has refunded or paid to the government what we believe were the fees that Greg Craig earned, about $4.6 million. So that's a good piece. I recommend it. Also, I've linked to a report at The Nation that shares with us about two-thirds of the way through the story that the Committee for the Republic gave John Kiriakou an award back in January. It's their Defender of Liberty Award, and I congratulate John for a well-deserved honor. The rest of the article about that group is interesting as well. So last night on CNN, Bernie Sanders featured in a town hall, and I have no issues or disagreements, major disagreements with his domestic economic policy issues. He's still very sharp on the income and wealth disparities in this country. But here's what hurt. Bernie Sanders responded to a question and fully embraced Russiagate, that Russia meddled in our election in 2016, and he did hint in his passive way that the DNC wasn't fair to him in 2016. But he had an opportunity to explain how that election was stolen from him, and he didn't even attempt it. When asked about Venezuela, he did explicitly oppose a U.S. military intervention. But I guess afraid to be tagged with the failed socialist government of Maduro and Chavez, he ducked that issue and came off sounding like most of the other enablers of Trump's regime change in Washington. Also, a very lame answer when asked if he'll release 10 years of income taxes. He said, sure, very soon. But he had a very poor explanation for why he refused to do that in 2016. He was asked by a young woman about socialism and democratic socialism, and he responded with a kind of rehearsed answer. And he didn't mention that socialism is a demonized term and that people need to recognize that socialism by itself is not evil and that it is a great balance to excessive capitalism. Here's his quote. What democratic socialism means to me is having in a civilized society the understanding that we can make sure that all of our people live in security and in dignity. Healthcare is a human right. All people should have health care. You can't get ahead in this country, in this world, unless you have a decent education. We've got to, as a right, end the kinds of discrimination, racism, sexism, and the homophobia that exists. So to me, when I talk about democratic socialism, what I talk about are human rights and economic rights. But don't be afraid of the word, Bernie. Young people are not inflamed. They don't think socialism equates to communism. But he has these old-style ways of approaching sensitive issues and tough questions. And he often appears to be dodging them and refusing to provide a very simple and direct answer. So Elizabeth Warren, who's not raising a lot of money in her campaign, has decided to try the Bernie way. She said she will no longer hold private fundraisers, one-on-one meetings with big donors. Quote, that means no fancy receptions or big money fundraisers, only with people who can write the big checks. It means that wealthy donors won't be able to purchase better seats or one-on-one time with me at our events. It means I won't be doing call time, which is when candidates take hours to call wealthy donors to ask for their support. Well, that's a very risky maneuver. And she is betting that she can get the individual grassroots $27 contributions to fund her campaign. And I don't think that that is a given at this point. I wish her well, and I'd love to see her run a corporate-free campaign, but I'm not sure that it will keep her campaign alive if she proceeds in this manner. Thanks for listening to my daily news and comment podcast. You are free to distribute it, to share it far and wide. You'll find it on YouTube, and I'm still Peter B. Collins.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails.